Everyone, welcome. Welcome to, hopefully everyone's had good lunch. You're relaxed, you're ready to learn more. We're here on the panel sponsored by the SVTA, Streaming Video Technology Alliance, to discuss bridging broadcast and streaming, lessons from the front lines. David was originally going to be moderating this panel as well too. He did some good research. Found out that May 2025 was a milestone. For the first time, streaming's share of total television usage was at 44.8%, and traditional broadcast was at 20.1, and cable was at 24.1, which together was 44.2. Hey, so this is a tipping point where you're seeing streaming now eclipsing traditional broadcast and cable combined. So this is a great time for this kind of conversation, which is, let's talk about the workflows behind the scenes. Let's talk about how it's converging. Are people still looking at the way they deliver broadcast the same way that they deliver online content? So with that, I'd love to let these folks quickly give a 30-second talk, and then we'll get into the questions. Do you want to start with Craig? We'll go down from there.
Sure. Mm-hmm. Craig Dubose. My background is mainly IT infrastructure systems, especially in the media space. I've worked at Time Warner Cable, Charter Communications, Intel, and most recently at Microsoft in the consulting services, where I was media processing and delivery architect. Thanks.
I'm Daniel Alinder. I run Vindrel, a Swedish company, not a big one, but we've been in the business of streaming for more than 10 years now. And we started out doing ultra low latency as our main focus. We have shifted our focus a bit after that. We have a product that's made to deliver video synchronized to all viewers with configurable latency. It exists as a cloud service and as an engine. And we also have a software that's used by studios to do a whole host of things that have traditionally been done by hardware. And I will use the amazing word AI as well for the first time for this panel. Jokes aside, we have added functionality for specific requests from clients, like we're having sound being spilled from other studios where they're building dense setups, etc. So we use AI features to remedy that.
My name is David Hassoun. I ran a consulting and development firm for about 18 years, and we were acquired by Dolby Labs a few years back. After Dolby now, I just kind of do consulting as well as chairperson for the SVTA advertising work group and the dean of the SVTA University.
And I'm working. I'm Robin Wilson. I'm also helping the SVTA subject matter expert on, I guess, systemization. I like to keep it broad. I co-chair the low latency streaming group right now. Got a background in compression and digital in general, and players particularly helped MLBAM launch in Europe and Disney streaming launch everywhere else. I helped the player team actually in that particular area as a consultant.
Great. And I should have mentioned I'm with David and Robin, co-chair of the AI committee for SVTA, but thank you, Daniel, for mentioning AI first. Before we get into the questions here, I just want to see what the split looks like in the audience. Who is coming from a traditional broadcaster and who is coming from a streaming? So traditional broadcasters, anybody? A couple there. And then who's coming from like OTT or streaming space? It's actually more of those as well too. So hopefully we're going to provide some good comparison between the two.
Some of them are both.
And some of them are both. That's very, yeah. Good catch. So is the goal, like looking at, let's take away live content for a second. Is the goal to leave linear behind? Let's talk about what is the concept of this merger? Who's going to benefit the most from this? Let's start with David and we can run around from there.
I mean, so, when we talk about linear and the broadcast side, right, there is value there. Rob and I had an interesting conversation the other day around is linear actually the continued goal of sorts, or is it better served with what you can do in the OTT space and being able to select what you want when you want? And I still think that there's good use cases and powerful value in the linear side for broadcast, not just around the kind of the tentpole events and sports and so forth, which is the main, I think, one that's always going to have the staying power. But there's also value in that realm for just ease of use and certain demographics, as well as how you can use that to provide a transition into more premium packages and solutions that are more in the OTT space. So I don't think linear is going away. It's not a like, hey, great, we're going to transition away from that, except for just these live events and so forth and news, which still I think has a major mainstay. But there is a key factor of that to continue to ongo, even in the digital side, whether it be through fast channels or other forms that provide an ease of experience, especially because we have so much content these days. And content discoverability and that experience has actually turned into one of the challenges that users can spend just as much time looking for what to watch instead of just watching something, and having solutions in linear space for that easy access, especially for sometimes even the older demographic, which is also extremely valuable, provides a great transition as they do go from the traditional, over-the-air linear kind of side into this digital realm. So it's not going to go away, and it does have good value. And even for younger segments, it's really valuable for kind of focused, here's this content that you're interested in, and whether it be personally curated or genre curated, I think there's still great value there.
And one example, I think we might have talked about this, was what I call a kind of hybrid approach. A fast channel can be used as a barker channel, and that would be where you have some really high value or moderately high value content. But there's a lot of history there, maybe, five previous versions of the movie, all the outtakes, all the promos. It's probably 5, 10, 15 hours worth of content. You could run that on a carousel for a month. And it's good content by itself, but it's also advertising your new blockbuster, which may or may not be on the same platform. But that's just one example where there's a blur in between.
Yeah, Pluto has done that really well.
Okay.
Daniel,
I think personally, one thing I think about a lot is future proofing, especially your business strategy. Actually, what you're actually trying to sell, and from that, I don't know. From that perspective, it might be non-ideal to try to push linear way too hard. It is. I agree that there's people that expect you to deliver linear, but coming from Europe and coming from the Nordic countries especially, I mean, this is personal. I really don't understand the appeal of linear personally, so I'm biased, yes, but it's we've come. I know that the US, as you mentioned, has also come very far in transitioning to streaming, but especially in the Nordics, it's like I don't even know. I'm not sure even how I would set up a linear input to my TV, like how I would get the signal. It's so uncommon in my demographic. It's limited, but still. So it depends also on the market that you're trying to service.
I mean, it's a great international perspective because everyone looks and thinks about their market first, and it's good to see what people are seeing from the other side who don't necessarily know or care. Do you have any, Craig, you want to add anything inside here or before we move on to the next question? Or?
My perspective tends to be much more from the infrastructure space and thinking about the actual distribution technologies. I started basically in the internet space and was pulled into what became the now traditional cable television. And as some of the panels upstairs talked about, so suddenly those dinosaurs that generate 10, 20, $30 billion a year, are dead. But I think it's so as a technology side, I've always thought that there's a difference between whatever the business strategy is versus what the delivery capabilities are and that technology that gets delivered. And so when I look at it, I think of more of that, broadcast and linear are much more, there is no more efficient method to get video out than broadcast, whether that be over the air or satellite. And so if you take that to a streaming perspective, that starts to change your economics, which starts to drive whatever your monetization strategy is and whatnot. So I guess that's So I have a little bit of different one,
Yeah.
right? And that's all those little inputs that are on the devices is in the Nordics where they would go through. But if you don't have over-the-air broadcast, it does very little good.
And I want to get into that one in just a second. Let's do a quick little sidetrack to talk about FAST for a quick bit before we go into the streaming operation infrastructure to do that, because I think that's a really good bifurcation right there of where the data comes from. But let's like with fast channels that are out there right now, and maybe this is not necessarily one for international side. I'm not sure how fast is becoming prevalent outside the U.S. If it is, great, let us know. But is that
I
like
got some numbers.
Okay, that'll be great. Yeah, so is that a segue for some people? Is FAST a way to get the linear content and the content that they've created out to the market in a way?
Well, I just maybe not answer that question, but hot from my friends at Whirl, about 2,000 fast channels in the U.S. and probably another 4,000 additional ones outside globally. So that makes 6,000, because it depends how you count. But that would be their definition is smart TV. It's almost entirely smart TV. So that's a smart TV definition, or connected TV definition.
If I'll just put some perspective on that. When I was at Charter, we ran about 20,000 live channels nationwide. So as far as scale, right, that's what we had to deliver with. That's with all the broadcasts, the over-the-airs, and pegs as well.
I remember a side story. I remember when we were looking at all the rules for, let's say, football rights, and looking at all the different affiliate channels that are out there, the number of linear playouts that you had to do in order to build out even just streaming of the linear channels was tremendous. You're absolutely right. There's a lot more complexity behind the scenes that we don't know about. And honestly, from a consumer perspective, they really don't know about the technology stack. They're looking at an app, right? So how does that make a difference in terms of them knowing it's a fast channel versus just some content to watch on TV?
Well, I mean, I think the goal is, though, it's transparent, right? Yeah, I turn on my TV. It's a smart TV. Great. Oh, look, there's a channel here. I can watch it. Whether it's coming from OTT as a fast channel, right? Or if it's coming from, we'll call it over-the-air broadcast, although obviously it could be cable or otherwise. It should be, and most times I think it is transparent to the users, depending on the type of devices and such that they're on. And that's where I see Fast Channel as a couple different key use cases. One is it does provide a good transition for those who want that just normal TV, old school linear experience, and I can just turn on and watch something. And hey, great, ooh, there's a channel that's focused on sci-fi. I like sci-fi. This is probably going to be something I want to watch, right? And it's as simple as that. It also provides an interesting route for, as Robin kind of talked about, you can use it as kind of the marketing element to transition users into a paid model and so forth from an app perspective or whatnot, or platform perspective. And also creates an interesting value when you look at, hey, I have all these rights to all this content that's sitting on the shelf. What can I use to drive views on that and get some revenue from advertising and so forth? And there's growth in there. You might not make a lot, but also if the effort's little, like the guys at Ivan have killer platforms for being able to spin up these channels really powerful and easily and control them. And you can monetize it, right? There's tons of different platforms and solutions out there. And if it's simple to do and you already have the rights, it's kind of why not if the revenue is worth that. So it's great to help you utilize the content in other ways because you should have as many levers and pulleys as you can to generate money from what you own. And that is just one route. It isn't going to maybe be your primary money winner, but if it helps, why not?
And one of the secrets, or maybe it's not so secret about fast channels, is they can be really, really, really cheap to put up and put them up very professionally for very low cost and get a very high value out of your ad load all at the same time. I'd say it's a pretty compelling for your back catalog or whatever, pretty compelling.
So you have, let's say, 10,000 assets, 5,000 assets, whatever number of assets or hours of assets that are out there. Now you've got the question of, okay, do I put this on broadcast over the air? Do I put this on a streaming channel, et cetera? And what is the technology there? So I want to break that question up into, like, if you're running broadcast and streaming side by side, maybe this is a good question for the people who are doing both. What does that look like? What does that and the back end look like? And we're going to look at the two different questions in this area: the operation side of it, of the streaming technology and or the broadcast technology that has to merge and then bifurcate at a certain point, and then the business operation side of it. What makes the business aspects of doing it one way or another different? Who wants to tackle that one first?
Well, I just say on the live, at least large event live, the ingest is the same, and I think it should be the same production, same quality, same value. Remote, REMI, mixed, hybrid, whatever. We're talking big, Super Bowl, Olympic kind of stuff. The split happens after the mezzanine feed, and there may be two different. One goes to Amazon Cloud at a certain rate. One goes to the broadcast center, whatever it's called these days. Maybe it's the same feed, or it could be two, but that's just two different encoders. And then there's maybe some bifurcation. Well, obviously, the whole back end, the packaging, encoding, DRM is different, and then the transmission, whether it's over satellite or fiber to terrestrial stations or cable or DBS.
You remember David and I, when we used to work with NBC Sports on the Olympics, we would pick up all the streams exactly to your point, but then we could separate out certain streams that would just be for online versus the on-air, like the beauty cameras and a lot of the smaller events that they couldn't monetize as much on the broadcast side, but they could monetize it better online. Craig, you wanted to talk operations as well too.
Just to reset a little bit, I think that there's only a very limited audience that has a choice for their content of whether to go what would be actually considered broadcast, like over the air, versus what would be available on streaming for the fast or SVOD or AVOD. Simply because generally the gate to that is licensed spectrum. So if you don't have licensed spectrum, then you pretty much have to go one direction. And I think when you see one of the quotes somebody else talked about earlier was, about 2 million content providers now active that YouTube is tracking, right? Well, they don't have licensed spectrum. So I think so I look at that one, and I agree with Robin that the production value should be adequate, right, to do that. But what tends to happen is the amount of capture devices that they have. And so even for some of the largest leagues in the world, they tier what their caption could be. The Olympics you mentioned is actually a really good one. Like the Olympic broadcaster, they have a duty to basically serve the world. And so there's certain places where they can't send all the content. So they tend to curate and some produced feeds that are kind of what would be the highlights, right? Which would be done in-house maybe in a traditional broadcaster, or maybe done by prosumer type stuff. I hate saying UGC because so much of it now it actually is professional level content that is just more bespoke.
I think from our streaming perspective, it's some of the things that we've seen working with companies that have made this, like trying to go broadcast and streaming as a unified process. It's been very interesting to see the challenges that brings, because it's traditional being separate teams, just getting them to work together, getting them to work in a process where they actually can they can cooperate. But also for us, it's put some new requirements on our product as well, because it needs to be interoperable with the different tools that they're using. So one of the big changes for us was we actually we realized that there's a value of not just creating one finished product for them and say, hey, this is the whole package. You're buying it all. But they said, well, I want to buy this component. I want this module in this part of my workflow. And if we were just offering a cloud service, that's impossible. Like, we can't do that. You're using the cloud service, and here's the input and output. But what we chose to do was deliver our product as parts and API enabled. So I guess what I'm trying to say is it being interoperable with these workflows, it's quite complex, but it makes it at least possible.
Well, is there, and David, before you jump in, the looking at the business operations side of it and the tools that are used by the broadcast team versus the on-air team, online team, et cetera, is there a difference inside there? Is there a way to merge Because from a video perspective, you're getting sort of the same output, but is there a business need for different outputs and different
Yeah,
workflows?
for us, it was about we needed to make sure that we could receive those types of formats that they're using. I can talk about some of those things about a bit later, but there's also the topic of what are broadcast teams used to, what level of quality in one aspect. And what, like, for example, when we started, our software started being used for audio, and some of these audio engineers, they're used to like sitting in front of a $200,000 control panel, and all of a sudden it's a piece of software that is, honestly, it's amazing for the job, but it's not quite there in terms of what they're used to. And video is the same thing. So even just getting them used to the thought of, well, this is not going to be on a level where I'm proud. Like I take pride in my job, and I'm used to working with streams that are a million gigabits per second. All of a sudden, you're working with a stream that's 15 megabits per second because this is how your system works. But the result is that it's way more agile, it's way more easy, flexible to scale, etc. That was an organizational and team-focused challenge because you need people to agree. Well, okay, we can work with this stack.
I think you touched on the key part to me, and I think the biggest concern when you look at those in a hybrid situation is that traditional broadcast systems were a lot of hardware, right? And streaming has been more software driven and more cloud driven as time has gone on. And I think where you have a challenge is when you have one very traditional one and one very new one, you now have a very bifurcated system. And there's things and elements that both can really gain from each other, right? You have the stability factor on traditional broadcast and scale and so forth, of course, the 5/9 mentality versus the streaming, which is quick, DevOps driven, scalable through software and hope that it works. And the challenges that come with that, but you have a much more agile approach. And there's value there, and ultimately it should be a hybrid approach because there are elements from both of value and some that are going to be required for more so on one versus the other. But it's not an easy solution, especially if you went into and bootstrapped like we're keeping these very system. And a lot of times there was this wall between your traditional broadcast and your streaming, and yes, cool, we'll get an acquisition and then send that to both, and then they're both on their own to do it.
Yeah.
And I think that's the big challenge, and that's where it made sense at first when streaming was the new kid on the block. We don't want to mess with our existing systems. We've got to kind of get this stuff figured out. Let's just attack it on. But now as the scales have shifted, all right, and are going to continue that route, how do you still maintain that? Because the goal isn't to be getting done away with of the traditional broadcasting, at least not for a good while. So how can we support those and make that more efficient and effective as we now have a shift in the order?
One of the areas I think you touched on was this 5/9 reliability, which I know I researched this ahead of time, is about 5 minutes a year. The other number I researched, which I know is apples and oranges, so forgive me on this, but 1% rebuffering ratio used to be, let's be fair, used to be a metric that streamers look to or even aim for. That's 1,000 times worse. 1,000. Now, to be fair, apples and oranges, and no streamer would ever dare to do 1% rebuffering, but that is very common metric people use as a rule of thumb. That needs a complete reset. I mean, absolute reset, like 0.0001 might be a more appropriate number now. Okay, in certain. The challenge we've got, of course, is broadcasters, I use that word generically, own their whole system, or it's a very deterministic, 100-year-old RF system that is absolutely works. Streamers don't own, don't control, so it's influence without authority, never a good thing. You're stuck. And the way, and this came up at NEB, I think there was a very good session. Dan Rayburn runs a group there, and Mayor Sirivasan from Fox.
Yeah.
Gave a good talk, and it's, if you want to be a geek, you can look at all the geeky stuff. But my takeaway on that was it was kick-ass program management, all about program management, rehearsals, failover, muscle memory, kind of moonshot mentality, and that's where the streamers can take a lot from the broadcasters, but they've got another challenge. Sorry to keep going on this, but it's a big challenge, which is stress testing is really, really hard because if it's a live event, you don't have the 20 million subscribers, and that's what kills you. So how the heck do you stress test?
Well, I think you're hitting upon one of the big differences between broadcast and online streaming, where scale from the audience perspective is very different for broadcast cable versus online streaming. Craig, you can probably talk about this even better than we can.
Well, I think they are. They are converging, and that's why I look at it different, and I just see them as on the application layer. Like whether you're a streamer or whether you're a broadcaster, you just want the layers below you to work, and I work in the infrastructure layer, so that's what I focus on. But the scale numbers are exactly it. I remember, I think it was Hotstar with not too long ago with the cricket, where they hit, they were phenomenally successful and hit 20 million. Right? Well, that's peanuts for considering for what the tier one operators deliver for the Super Bowl. Right, so our numbers, that's where it starts, and it goes up. And I think so you come from one side, which I appreciate what Robin you're saying, where you talk about our minimum was for our operations team was 5 nines. That was it. And the metric was people pick up their phone and they call and complain. On the streaming side, it's very rare that people can even contact somebody at maybe these large aggregators or platforms to talk to somebody to complain and threaten to cancel. And I think even Netflix, saw this pain when they started going into live streaming. So I think and we're probably muddling it a little bit. I think you're muddling it a little bit between streaming and broadcast versus live events versus VOD and buffering and all this. But I think the point is that shows that everything is converging in the middle. And I think you basically said they don't really want to care, right? The application, the driving force for all the product teams that I've worked with, for all the leagues and for all those others was that they wanted transparency for their customers on where that came from. They didn't want to care whether they were on the live one. They didn't want to care whether it was a picture-in-picture that they were showing, or whether they were in a deep, basically binge kind of VOD experience, right? They wanted, the point of the app was to basically unify that experience and keep that attention. And
I think just to add on to that, you're absolutely right. That's what, in the beginning when I talked about let's leave live events out of it, because you're right, it's a very different scale. That's a different bifurcation. But when you're looking at just a linear play out, online, OTT, and fast channels and versus broadcast, that's where you've got more similarities, where the operations and the equipment and whatnot can be similar until a certain point where they've got to diverge. Live events and streams, you're absolutely right.
But I think even in just to jump back in on that, I think even if you look at Prime and you look in their UI, you'll come to a level that it'll say live on. There's Grand Design, I think, is one of the programs that will show up in mine. Right? It's not a live channel. It's not a live program anymore. Right? It's if it is, it's in season 27. Maybe you're behind. I think what they're indicating by live is, and I think this ties back to infrastructure and to buffering, is delivering all this stuff when you have almost no concurrency is expensive. It's a real cost. And so I think part of what you're seeing in some of these channels is a way to defer delivery costs, because they're able then to take this curated program, put it as a point in the program where it's highly cacheable, so that the downstream and the edge basically have some delivery efficiency to it. And that's, and that is the same thing when you look at traditional operators from the VOD space. That was the same thing. We had to maintain service groups to be able to give you an actual program so that you could go in and you could turn on, you'd have a successful session set up, and you'd get a buffer-free video experience. That took dedicated bandwidth. And so I think you're starting to see that as some of these kind of trends. Maybe they're not exactly fast, but they're definitely cacheable linear channels that they're able to basically, and anytime they can basically pull eyeballs into those programs, they're starting to get delivery efficiencies, which start to reduce their cost, which start to increase their CPMs. And so that becomes a much more profitable service for them, even if you think it's like, oh, I'm watching this program, that's great. that's that app experience that pulls you in.
I'm going to go on to another topic to tie onto that if you guys don't have it. Do you want to add on? Okay. But so I'm going to pick up on the ad part of it because we talked about that. Let's talk about the ad experience in broadcast versus the ad experience for streaming. And I'm going to say streaming as a whole. There are differences in the way, and over dinners and drinks, we've talked about the lack of commonality or the ads for online. But let's talk a little bit about some of your opinions about ads in broadcast and/or stuff, because I know there's going to be a lot. This will be fun.
Well, I'm going to jump in real fast. I mean, right out of the gate, I think one of the really key things, and even that's maybe not so specific to ads, one of the biggest powers when you get out of the traditional kind of broadcast, and although you can see a little bit there, it's essentially personalization, right? What can be made unique to that user that can engage them better? And that's one of the key things that comes right out of the gate with ads, and why they're so different is that, great, we now have personalized driven ads, at least with the capability of that for dynamic ad insertion, that says, hey, I know some information about you, your specific habits, likes, dislikes, etc., and I can then try to target directly to that. And the concept of it is beautiful, right? Oh, great, it makes us so much more valuable, and we can do more effective advertising and so forth is a theory. Now, there's also the challenge of inventory and other factors and frequency caps, whether they work well or not. I've seen so many commercials for certain things on shows, and it can be kind of annoying. But that's the challenges that we have there. It's also interesting, though, and like one of the key differences in digging into stuff that you look at is the willingness and the appetite for how much advertising people are willing to watch on streaming versus on traditional kind of broadcast, where you have, I think it's about 16 minutes per hour is the average advertising on, let's say, traditional, where it's down to more like 8 to maybe 10 minutes on streaming. That's where the appetite lines kind of draw. And that creates other challenges and so forth for how do we monetize and the difference between there. But ultimately, like right out of the gate, the big difference is in traditional, everyone's going to see the same commercial and they're sold well in advance and prepared and so forth and gone from there, except for some local kind of integrations and whatnot and affiliates, versus on the streaming side, we have the capability to do much more with that. And that's just the beginning of it when we start looking at, better new ad experiences that we can do with pullbacks and multi-view and other stuff and interactive. But there's still this big issue, in my opinion, that we have with inventory and how that's actually becoming effective and the amounts that we need to get there on the streaming side.
And just to provide clarity, that comes from his experience of building out players that connect with all the ad platforms and putting the capability out there, setting the metadata out there, and still not seeing the right responses coming back. I think that's where the pain comes from, is the execution of that.
Yeah. So dynamic ad insertion for at least in a provider network has been around for about 20 years. Most people, and that's addressable ads. So all the way down to DMA and zip code, and you can even get smaller than that in a lot of the networks. So it's actually a mature industry. It's not necessary. So as you bring it into the and I know you know that. So as you bring that into the streaming space, I think what you see a lot of times when I see either I'll use Amazon just because that's what I typically watch through through Prime. There's a lot of times where you can see that an ad wasn't actually trafficked, and they'll run something of their own promo or whatnot. Now, as an aggregator that has all this other stuff, they have an advantage to being able to do that another platform doesn't have. So I think that upstairs they were talking about different monetization strategies. So as an aggregator, do you have things to do that? Can you run a stunt reel? Can you something like that, a Barker channel as you mentioned, right? Or a playback, another type of playback. I think there's a content producer difference in the way ads come back, how they can get monetized. I think one of the ones that always sticks with me is if you look at the duration of a show. If you remember when the show was on air, it was like, oh, it filled up 60 minutes. When you see it and it goes to VOD, like a lot of times it's 43. Mm-hmm. Okay? So you start looking at there was 17 minutes worth of ads that helped pay to produce that content and get it delivered to you. That has to be made up somewhere. And I think when you start talking about ad fatigue, and you start looking at how you come through with this and what the impressions are. Right? Those, I think, are all key components when you look at that convergence of the space. And if people, which are starting to show some fatigue on SVOD packages, are starting to see, like the playback fatigue, that 17 minutes still needs to get closed in order to produce this valuable content.
And that is on the program management side of doing this stuff, but it doesn't seem like, and you guys correct me if I'm wrong, there doesn't seem to be any kind of technical convergence on from broadcast versus online.
No, I think there actually is. I mean, the
Addressable TV.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's only a handful of ADSs out there. I mean, like Google's a massive one, right? You have Xandr on the other side, and then you have a few other that people sometimes will build their own. Like an operator might decide to build their own ADS to do their own linear insertion because they have enough data to enrich that with, or they have a market to go get data to provide that. I think so, and then that market between all the buyers and the sellers of ad inventory, I think that's a smaller space than a lot of people think. And so that, from a technology perspective, is actually it's easy enough to converge. I think the actual pain point there is, do you have enough eyeballs to justify that convergence? Because if you just want to give away the ad on, which is what really YouTube does. I mean, most people on YouTube, right? They take a 45% rake. I mean, that's really big. At some point, if you become enough of a brand, 45% tax on your content is going to be, you may decide like I can go and find another way to do this, and can I make it, more profit myself?
Yeah. Daniel, is there any international difference in terms of what we're talking about versus what you've experienced?
I think I shouldn't really speak that much about ads. We have customers that do, they do client-side ad insertions, which has its problems.
Yeah.
And some that just don't do dynamic at all.
Yeah,
I'll
be jumping out of ads as soon as
yeah,
Robin has a
I'll
comment
have
to go
enough
back
respect
into
for the audience
the operations
to say
and streaming.
you don't want to hear.
Yeah.
Yeah, a bit like Daniel, but I will say this. We're talking US here. At least in the broadcast in Europe, I'm from the UK originally, so it's legally restricted, and I don't know the number, it's probably closer to 8 minutes, and that's only on some channels, and I think the public and the other broadcasters in most of Europe pretty much the same, and the tolerance would not be there for much more. And I did just randomly get a YouTube recommendation. They're very good at finding odd things. Somebody was telling about their experience moving to Scotland, and their headline was, "There's no pharmaceutical ads on TV." I mean, that was their headline. I mean,
I'd watch it.
that says something. So the rest of the world is probably quite different, actually.
I think one thing worth mentioning is, and it's not news. I mean, because of the reasons that have been mentioned here, to create a fast channel, for example, it's been mentioned that it's cheap. But if you look at some of the streaming services that are out there, they're not cheap to run, and that makes the ad model harder. Because I mean, I'm a huge consumer of Twitch. I don't know if people are in here, but it is as a case study. It outperforms all other platforms when it comes to interactive content for the viewer. Just for viewer experience, it's amazing. But the problems they have, it's a lot of channels with few viewers, which makes the transcoding costs really high. And then they have to push a lot of ads, and people on the internet can use ad block, which they maybe won't if you don't oversaturate with ads. So you got that problem, like how do you make money? Well, you don't in this case. Which is a bit problematic. I just think it's an interesting thing to look at because the economy matters. Of course, it does. It has to be viable.
I did just want to add on a little bit to Robin saying is that even the limit in content is quite appreciated, but the fact that that there is a delta there, at least in the UK, especially for the BBC, that helps to make up their deficit, which is their license fee, which is going away and is causing serious concern in the UK. I mean, it's an existential crisis for the BBC, and in other markets, right? I can't speak authoritatively to how much the governments fund the content and how much they pay back in, right? We have the public broadcasting service here that does some of that. So I think that even that content is not free. It's being paid somewhere. It's just how aware are you of the monetization of that content?
We had that controversial topic that Craig talked about before. I'll say it, not really talk too much about it, but he said FAST is neither free nor television. Discuss. See some good thumbs up inside the audience as well too. We'll have some, if you have good questions, let us know about it. We can talk about that. One thing I want to make sure the audience learns something as well too. Let's talk about a couple of fun question for you. What's one thing that broadcasters can learn from streaming, and what's one thing streamers can learn from broadcasters? Come on.
Well, maybe I said it already, but it's kick-ass program management and stress testing at load, and quality metrics is here, not here. I think it's all about program management.
I mean, resiliency and scale
Yeah.
versus agility and speed for adaptability and new capabilities. Those I see as the two kind of things that can both be beneficial to the other. And there's challenges, as you mentioned, on hey, how can you get the stability of 5 nines in streaming? It's not easy. Yes, you can chaos testing, all this other stuff that you can look to implement, and Netflix has done a great job on some of that, but that doesn't solve everything. And in live, it's such a complex moving thing. And you talk about public web broadcast, it's a challenge, and no one CDN can do it. There's things that you can look to do to help, but that's just one piece of the pie, and there's a lot of different pieces and parts to bring together to ever think that you can get a 5.9 reliability with streaming. It's maybe not impossible, but it's not something that's at all regular yet.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. It's and actually knowing what you like, choosing priorities, I guess, between those things. I mean, if you need the agility and the flexible way of working, then I mean, for example, broadcasters. Well, I guess it's easy for me to say I'm on the streaming side, so I will be biased.
What would you tell
as
a
well.
broadcaster?
Like, you need to kill your darlings sometimes.
Yeah.
I guess that's it's hard, but you have to.
Do you have an example from like a potential customer engagement? Like what would you want to teach a broadcaster to do better?
I don't want to teach a broadcast. I want to learn from them. But it's also, I mean, one specific use case that actually in the audience here, Magnus from Iwin is on the same project. So actually, there's somebody here to correct me if I'm wrong, which is really, it's uncomfortable, but it's good.
You want my mic?
So it's the Swedish public broadcaster, and it's been very. I'm the CEO, so I'm not the guy to actually do all the things. But what I've learned from my team and from this organization is the way that they're switching from hardware-based production to software-based, and they've found a way to get these teams to talk to each other. And that's, I think that's, I mean, technology aside, it's humans that we're working with. So that's been a huge challenge. It's taken time, but you got to hand it to them. I mean, they're really on the forefront, and there's many other broadcasters that are looking at SVT specifically, learning from them, and that will be looking to do the same thing. So, yeah. Was it correct? Hell yeah, I got a thumbs up.
I'm gonna ask a follow up to that one. After you talk, I want to give you a chance, but I wanted to follow up with. So just keep this in your mind. You can get ready for this answer, which is, so at what point do you think for that customer will the two teams converge into one team? So think about that for a little bit. We'll let Craig.
I'll just say I don't know.
Okay. Oh, there's the easy answer. Yeah.
So I think I'll just say it one way, because I don't want to presume that the broadcasters do bad, because I don't work in a broadcaster. But I think the thing that I notice differently between broadcast productions that are supposedly integrating an audience component versus what the streamers, even the high-end streamers do, is their acceptance of feedback for what they're doing, either positive or negative. I think there's a perhaps a hubris that comes across in some of the broadcast, the interactive broadcast stuff that, because they kind of have this professional mindset that, no, this is it. And I think so many of the streamers seem to be like, hey, I'm trying to figure this out. And I think that's if you meet in the middle there a little bit, I think you kind of come back. You said it very well. You want to learn from the broadcasters. I think the broadcasters wanting to learn from the streamers. I think that cross-pollination, I think, is the one thing that I would
Loosening up that rigidity a little bit of mindset.
Yeah. But I think the difference they have is people don't have the same tolerance for an ABC, CBS, or NBC falling on their face, or an HBO, or any of those. I worked at Charter when basically the Game of Thrones crashed, right? And so we took an unbelievable hit because of Game of Thrones and people not being able to watch that. It was not our fault, right? I mean, it was the origin fell down. And so we weren't even able to get that. And so on our TVE platform, right, that's not available, we can't distribute it. So I think that, and our customers were relentless on that, people calling back, wanting service credits, wanting all this stuff. So that creates and actually that was part of, that was part of creating STVA. Was the result of the operator saying, like, look, there needs to be a better set of standards that come from this, and a set of, to your point about interoperability, and even the EBU right now is looking at this from a streaming perspective in the infrastructure space when they look at media exchange.
European Broadcast Union.
Yeah, EBU. Yes, EBU.
Just want to make sure, in case some people in the audience didn't know what that was.
Thank you. Yeah, acronyms.
You presented very good, but one of the things that, from our experience, David and I, from working with NBC Sports in the past, one of the things that we learned from the broadcasters as well too, had to go back to program management, which is metadata, understanding all the program parts, the way that they organize between the cameras and the studios and the day parts, and figuring out what is actually going to go on the wire, and then where that can come out and be turned into something to use for streaming the Olympics, all the Olympic events, etc. That absolutely can be learned from them, and that mentality of, if we don't do it right now, do it correct right now, it won't go online or on air the right way. I think from a streaming perspective, there's always that you're building in failover, you're building in resiliency, you're building in buffer, you're building in ways for the system to fail in a way that doesn't impact the viewer. And I think that's a different mentality than a broadcaster who's like, I cannot fail and I need to build up ways to get things done.
Things are going to fail.
Absolutely. I know we've got about 10 minutes left, a little bit more than 10 minutes. I want to open it up to the audience to get some questions, and then Todd.
Yeah, thanks for the panel. You asked at the beginning of the session how many of you work for broadcasters and how many of you work. I actually, my career, I started at the Weather Channel. I moved over to the CDN side of things. So I've seen a lot. First of all, I want to say fast is not new. It's basically cable from the early 80s, right? I mean, those of us who are old enough remember not the best programming, and there's not a lot of difference. This is my question. I'm going to make a statement, then I'm going to ask each of you. I just think linear is dead. And that's a very controversial thing. But Bhavesh and I have kids the same age. My daughters are 23 and 19. I cannot get them to sit down to watch a movie. They all have ADHD. Okay. So I see nobody in this room that's probably under 30. Maybe there might be one or two people. We're all sitting here, we're older people thinking about what the future is. But when you think about the demographics, you think about how many young people in the third world, Latin America, Asia, Africa especially, they're all under 30. Many of them are under 20, right? They're not going to sit and watch linear. My own viewing habits have changed, where when, Bhavesh was producing the 2008 Olympics in Beijing, I was watching hours and hours. I can't remember the last couple Olympics have I watched hardly anything without going online and just watching it, right? I just won't sit and do it. So here's my question after all these statements. How long do we have left with linear?
32 years.
32 years. I won't be around to see it.
That's
But
when we retire.
my question is, each of you, how long do you think we really have of linear left?
Well, funny you mention all this about linear. Oh, I personally agree absolutely with what you say. I can't stand it. It's appointment-based viewing, and it's just rude to expect me to watch something at a certain time. But in this business, I cannot offend some of my customers, but I personally agree. And don't get me going about ads. I cannot stand those either. So I'm an antisocial person here. However, I think things are changing fast. I mean, sorry to use that pun.
Bad phrase.
I didn't
No
mean
pun
it.
intended.
Yeah.
No pun intended. Sorry. But on the other hand, I'm kind of thinking live here. People are going to age out, and that's gets
32 years.
32. I mean, he might accidentally or deliberately be right. I mean, because it's an age out thing. Yeah.
I 100% agree. Like, I made up 32 years in the sense of right now, 45 age plus, right? We come from an era that woke up and just turned on the TV and watched it, right? And there's still an appeal to that, more so maybe on the older side of that spectrum, as they transition out. There's still a lot that people go to for TV, but most of it now, for the larger stuff, is key events, right? Major sports events, news, that type of stuff. But that's all going towards digital. That all can still be scheduled. It's all a concept of scheduled elements, right? That are going to happen in a period of time, live. That's really the biggest value right now. But there's still this transitional period, and I think it's going to be a while. I think there's going to be a long tail on it, which is a royal pain in our butt to do. But there's also value in it because that's also where a lot of monetary return comes from a customer base. So I do think it's going to take a little while. I agree that that's going to be that transition out. Although one thing that has also always shown proven history is things kind of come back around. And who knows, 10 years from now, 5 years from now, 20 years from now, what that would look like and if that's going to shift. I don't think it will. I think you're right. I think it's going to be going towards shorter and shorter, more consumable content because we're not on the path of patience. But we'll see how that all transpires.
But there's a halfway compromise. Maybe it could be self-curated live recommendations. Then you set the autoplay button. I mean, YouTube has those kind of channels.
There's also
now.
like TikTok for you page
content
and
discovery is a
Instagram
total
Reels.
freaking mess right now,
Yeah.
right? And so much out there, and that's one of the biggest challenges of why I think it doesn't appeal to. Oh, screw it, just put something on for me, right?
Yeah.
And you add that with personalization. You know a lot about me. You know what I like. You're going to give me something that I'm generally willing to consume, and it can be in small chunks. Hey, these are all 15-minute episodes, right? Or 2-minute, whatever it is, as that adapts as the content does. But I do think the ease of access of a linear-esque element is something that could be very appealing as content continues to burst and grow. And I'm interested to see how that actually applies.
I'm going to 100% dodge your question, not answer it. But I will say one observation is that the most, like there's been another session on lean forward, lean back content and experiences. And I have to say that personal observation is that people, again, Twitch, I'm talking about interactive platforms that are like the most future, how would you say, the most future-ready platforms out there. They also offer some of the most lean-back content you will find. Like you put on a streamer, and it's just on in the background. They're playing a game or they're baking a cake or whatever they're doing, and it's like even less. It's even less than turning on the TV and there's a documentary. Well, the documentary is trying to get your attention. This content is just like, it's like having a radio station on in the background. That level of involvement. So it has nothing to do with your question, but it's the whole lean forward, lean back thing. You mentioned things things can sometimes come full circle. When it comes to the type of content, these streaming platforms are amazing. Like it's really interesting to see where it's going to go.
Well, I think I'll take the slightly contrarian perspective and say, first, it depends. It depends what you define as being linear and what you define as being broadcast and what the parameters are around that. But that said, I think So I'll say if you think of the lean back perspective, since you brought up the other talk, I think the interactivity, which is typically connoted with the lean forward experience, has been around for over 20 years in television. It's been around for nearly 30 years if you start to look at time shifting of that. So and I think that the consumption habits that you're seeing right now, I think that because you brought up the third world. So I think a lot of that consumption is driven not necessarily by preference, but by situational reality. Do they have 2 or 3 hours to sit and do nothing to just watch content? And that changes as you age. And so if you get into if you get into working years, that tends to go away, and you start, as I think Mr. Davis talked about in that panel upstairs, was that there's a temporal shift in our own behavior in a week, so that if you look at it, it's not the same on a Monday as we are on a Friday evening. But I think as we start to look at, people have mentioned the attention. So I think there's a critical loss of attention that people have, and we're getting times. So I'm basically saying I think like the prognostications that the book was going to die, and you're starting to see book sales increase, the same thing will happen with Look Back. And so that I think it'll be around a long time.
All right, let's get some more questions inside here.
So
Mr. Dave, just speak of the devil.
I'm a broadcast dinosaur. What's one sacred cow you guys want to put to death in the broadcast world that you see being done, that you think broadcasters need to stop doing this and need to learn from streamers?
Anyone care to?
But I'm not stepping into that trap.
Well, it gets back to my dislike for linear. It's boxing in a rigid playlist and telling me I'll watch it now or else. I stop doing that.
I don't think there's the bandwidth on the cable platform to do the number of channels that's out there. Maybe that's one of the things to look at is you've got finite bandwidth and you're programming to within that, whereas the people who are streaming have infinite bandwidth to add whatever we want. Not to say it's good quality, it's just quantity.
I can jump on. Retrans fees. So if you look at basically their licensing models for content use. So, and it's tied to, they need to monetize the content. But I think if you look at a lot of the sins that have happened, that a lot of the limitations on the delivery capabilities have come from the structural agreements inside of legal contracts, not necessarily technology or desire.
All right, I think we're getting the signal for out of time. Do we have one more question, or do you want to just wrap it up? One more question.
So,
Okay.
what you just said.
One second.
Wait. There.
So what you just said, I think, was that this is not a technological limitation that prevents us from switching off all broadcast channels or linear, digital, whatever the hell you call it, right? So it's not a technological limitation, it's actually a commercial limitation. That the long tail is driven by commercial interests of the broadcasters, operators, rather than a capability of the streamers to actually
I'm going to jump
meet and...
My buddy Terrence in the back over there, is that him? I don't. He said a story as we were chatting earlier about a student of his. He's a professor at Iowa State. He said that a student started streaming and commentating local high school sports games from his phone and from other stuff. And he got stopped by the local cable provider because of rights. It wasn't the technology that was the limiting factor. It was the fact that he didn't have rights to it. So they shut him down because he didn't have rights.
So the question I really wanted to ask earlier, which I'm guessing we're going to run out of time on, is basically why wouldn't the consumer switch 100% to streaming services right now? What's the limitation on doing that right now?
We've talked about this before. I don't think the consumer cares. They're just turning something on. To them, it's the line is blurring from television, broadcast, phone, whatever.
I think the one thing I would say is that there tends to be a maximum level, and I won't say what that is, for number of billing relationships that you have.
So if you guys have any last minute comments,
I mean, technology adoption, right? Switching over. There's other factors as far as fear when it comes to big events. Like, hey, do I want to risk watching the Super Bowl on a streaming device when I've heard other years as problems?
Is that consumer fear or operator fear?
I think it's consumer. And that's why I don't think it's always
You think?
valid, but I think those are some of the challenges that continue to adopt with that.
Yeah,
Dana,
so
do you have-
I thought you were asking for a closing
yes,
remark.
closing comments.
Yeah,
now, 'cause
okay.
we're jumping in.
Super quick thought is just we talked about interoperability before, and I think it's worth being aware, and people that are not aware should perhaps look up Media Over Quick, because it's an emerging standard that for us working with streaming is a huge deal. And it brings with it a promise of bringing interoperability to latency-controlled streaming. And that's very, very exciting. It's a lot of big companies looking into it right now. We've implemented it. So just a thing to look into.
And it's part of the SVTA as well, too. We're very happy for all that to come through to provide new technology. Thank you very much, Daniel. Robin, thank you very much. David, Craig, thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. See you next time.